Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? But you would give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times?
All right. Hello. Wrong screen. There we go. All right. It is time for Chapter 7 of the Time Travel Handbook. If you haven't seen the cover yet, that is the cover. Okay. This is a long chapter. It's 41 pages. The rest have been in the 25 range, so I'm not sure my voice will hold out for the whole 41. No pictures either. So, yeah. We'll just go until we can't anymore. If I can make it through, I certainly will do. So, Chapter 7, The Wingmakers and Time Travel. The ACIO one-time capsule. And we've got two quotes to to begin with. First one. The past is but the beginning of a beginning, and all that is and has been is but the twilight of the dawn. H.G. Wells' The Discovery of the Future, 1901. Truth is stranger than fiction because fiction has to make sense. This is true internet site. All right. The following story was taken from the internet. A web search for Wingmakers will turn up the relevant pages that this story is based on. The editor cannot verify whether the following is true or not. What follows is the unedited transcript from The Wingmakers, posted in December of 1998. All right. Project briefing and background. In 1972, in a remote section of northern New Mexico, a group of hikers discovered an unusual artifact and pictographs within an obscure canyon. I remember reports of this. An archaeologist from the University of New Mexico analyzed the artifact and searched the area where it was discovered, but no signs that a prehistoric culture had established any permanent site in the canyon. It was presumed that a nomadic Native American Indian tribe had occasionally used the canyon as a temporary settlement and had left behind a few artifacts of their presence as a consequence. There were, however, two very puzzling questions. All but one of the artifacts could be dated to the 8th century AD. The exception, known as the compass artifact, appeared to be an unusual form of technology and was found among more typical artifacts like pottery and simple tools. The compass was covered in strange hieroglyphic symbols, some of which were also found on the pottery. Secondly, the pictographs that were found in the area had inexplicably appeared, and they were strikingly different from any of the other native petroglyphs or rock art found in the Southwest or the entire continent for that matter. Because of these two anomalies, the artifacts and the entire project quickly became the property of the U.S. government, or more specifically, the National Security Agency. It was decided that these artifacts might suggest a prehistorical extraterrestrial presence on Earth, and that the NSA had the appropriate agenda and wherewithal to initiate a full-scale scientific expedition to determine the nature and significance of the site. The site was completely searched by a secret department of the NSA in 1973, but it only resulted in a few additional findings, and none of them were designated as technology or evidence of an extraterrestrial presence. Additional pictograph symbols were found, but decoding them was a difficult and frustrating process. Experts were called in to help, but it was impossible to reach a consensus as to what the pictographs meant. As quickly as the project had risen as a priority investigation, it fell into the archives of the NSA under the code name Ancient Arrow. 21 years later, in 1994, a series of rock slides opened up a section of the Ancient Arrow site. The canyon was in a naturally obscure section of parkland held by the state of New Mexico. After its discovery in 1972, it had been officially sanctioned off-limits to hikers and campers and was to be left in its natural state. From time to time, scientists sponsored by the NSA would visit the site hoping to uncover new evidence, but were invariably disappointed. Shortly after the rock slide occurrence, a small team of operatives from the NSA visited Ancient Arrow Canyon to do some follow-up research. They discovered the rock slide had exposed an entrance to a hidden cavern that led deep within the canyon walls. At the back of this cavern, the research team discovered a well-hidden entrance into the interior of the canyon wall or rock structure of the Ancient Arrow site. There they found a system of tunnels and chambers that had been carved out from solid rock. There were a total of 23 chambers, all intricately connected to an interior corridor, and each chamber held a specific wall painting, series of pictographs, written hieroglyphs, and what seemed to be dormant alien technologies. Once this entrance to the cavern was found, a report was immediately filed with the director responsible for the Ancient Arrow project. The project was then formally brought under the jurisdiction of the Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization, ACIO, which organized an interdisciplinary research team to assess the exact nature of the site and attempt to discover additional artifacts or evidence of an extraterrestrial visitation. The ACIO is a secret or unacknowledged department of the NSA. It is headquartered in Virginia, but also has personnel in Belgium, India, and Indonesia. They are largely unknown even to senior directors within the NSA. The ACIO is the lowest profile organization within the entire intelligence community. Its agenda is to research, assimilate, and replicate any technologies or discoveries of extraterrestrial origin. Its personnel consists mainly of scientists who are completely anonymous but are paid salaries in excess of $400,000 per year because of their security clearance and IQ. This secret organization not only possesses enormous brain power, but it is also in possession of technologies that are far in advance of any other research facility on the planet. They are, in a word, privileged. The artifacts found at the ancient Arrow site were virtually incomprehensible to the research team. There were many mysteries. Why would an advanced culture leave their artifacts in such a precise and seemingly ordered manner? What was the message they were trying to leave behind? What were their technologies, and why did they leave them behind? Did the creators of this site intermingle with the native tribes, or remain an isolated culture? Who were they, and why were they here in the 8th century? Were they planning to return? These were only some of the mysteries that challenged the research team. Throughout the 7 months of restoration, cataloging, and analysis, the Ancient Arrow project was a complete enigma. More energy went into the safe preservation of the artifacts than attempting to solve the puzzle of their existence, though speculations were a topic of every conversation. Gradually, a hypothesis was structured by the research team that an extraterrestrial culture established an Earth colony in the 8th century and isolated itself within the ancient Arrow Canyon. They brought with them a very precise mission to leave behind a massive time capsule that would prove to be discovered in the late 20th century. While the exact nature of the time capsule was unclear to the research team, it seemed probable that it was a cultural exchange of some kind and had no invasive intent to Earth or its people. It took a team of researchers nearly 2 years after the restoration was completed to decipher a partial meaning of the chamber artifacts. The 23 separate chambers seemed to be linked together to form some specific message or purposeful mission. In the 23rd and final chamber, they recovered a small optical disc that was presumed to hold digital information that could be the key to deciphering the artifacts. Scientists eagerly analyzed the disc, but they could not figure out how to access its content. The ACIO's finest computer experts were called in to try and unlock the encoded disc, but to no avail. Several more months were spent trying every conceivable method to access the contents of the disc, but nothing worked. The Ancient Arrow project, for the first time in nearly a year, had hit a dead end, and funding for the project was rapidly weaned by the ACIO. After 2 more months of unsuccessful efforts, it was decided that the technology to access the disc was simply not available. The optical disc and all the artifacts and findings would be carefully placed in secure storage until the technologies were available to unlock the disc and harvest its content. It was presumed that the disc held star charts, translation indexes, glossaries, and all the answers to the various mysteries of its creators, and perhaps more importantly, their intentions for Earth. While the optical disc was considered to be the key to unlocking the meaning of the time capsule, the ACIO had little choice but to place the project into storage and await the arrival of technologies that would permit them to unlock the disc. However, there were 2 scientists from the research team who theorized that the disc could not be unlocked by understanding the meaning of the that the disc could be unlocked by understanding the meaning of the wall paintings in each of the 23 chambers. In their minds, it was not a complex technological solution, but rather a language or translation solution that would unlock the disc. After much persuasion, the ACIO agreed to allow the 2 researchers to assemble a replica of the time capsule's contents. The replica time capsule consisted of detailed drawings and photographs of all the artifacts from each of the 23 chambers, including detailed high-resolution photographs of the wall paintings. The 2 scientists would be allowed to continue their research on their own time, provided they maintained utmost secrecy and reported all their findings directly to the ACIO division head and project director. The optical disc was securely stored away in a vault within the ACIO. The project was officially put on indefinite hold, and all personnel associated with the project were reassigned with promotions to different projects. The Ancient Arrow project was not to be spoken of again until which time the technologies or some other means provided a way to unlock the optical disc and access its contents. The scientists spent nearly 5 months in partnership trying unsuccessfully to decode the ancient arrow artifacts and establish the means to unlock the optical disc. During this time, the ACIO regularly experimented with new technologies or methods, and they too were unsuccessful in unlocking the content of the optical disc. One day late in the summer of 1996, one of the scientists, a linguistics expert, had an insight into how to unlock the optical disc by reducing the symbols of the wall paintings to their closest facsimile found in an ancient Sumerian text. While the Sumerian language is extinct, it was sufficiently comprehensible to this scientist that he was able to decode the symbols of the paintings, and placing the 23 words in the same order as the ancient arrow chambers, he was able to finally unlock the optical disc. The connection between the Sumerian language and the time capsule was the breakthrough the ACIO team had been waiting for. A simple set of 23 words elicited over 8,000 pages of data from the optical disc. Unfortunately, the data was incomprehensible because there was no character set in the computer that could emulate the hieroglyphics and unusual symbols of the language. Thus, a translation index needed to be developed, which took an additional 6 months. Finally, once a translation index was programmed into the computer, the data, while it could be printed out or viewed on the monitor in its hieroglyphic form, still required translation to English. And this translation process was extremely tedious and could not be facilitated through computers owing to the subtlety of the language and its intricate connection to the wall paintings and pictographic representations elsewhere within the ancient arrow site. As partial translation began to be developed, it was determined that even within the optical disc there was a segmentation of the data into 23 units. Each unit appeared to correspond to a specific chamber. As the first 2 chambers began to be translated, it was further shown that each unit contained philosophical and scientific papers, poetry, music, and an introduction to the culture and identity of its creators. The creators of the time capsule referred to themselves as wingmakers. They represented a future version of humanity who lived some 750 years in our future. They claimed to be culture bearers, or ones that bring the seeds of art, science, and philosophy to humanity. They had left behind a total of 7 time capsules in various parts of the world to be discovered according to a well-orchestrated plan. Their apparent goal was to help the next several generations of humans develop a global culture, a unified system of philosophy, science, and art. In early 1997, the ACIO scientist who had originally discovered the access code for the optical disc became strangely sympathetic with the Wingmaker's mission. He was convinced that the ACIO would never share the discovery with the public, and he was certain that it was too significant to withhold. He also claimed that he was in communication with the Wingmakers and that they were watching the ACIO's progress and would, at the appropriate time, make the time capsule and its contents available to the public. This assertion troubled the ACIO and particularly the Ancient Arrow Project director, who eventually recommended a leave of absence for the scientist who was summarily dispatched from the project. The scientist was afraid that his memories would be tampered with or destroyed altogether, and so he defected from the ACIO, quite literally the first to ever do so. Soon after his defection, the scientist disappeared. However, before his disappearance, some of his materials regarding the Wingmakers and their time capsule were given to a journalist that he had selected at random. The author of this document is that journalist. I am in possession of the photographs, music, poetry, artwork, translation indexes, copies of secret documents, and a variety of translated philosophical texts that all stem from the Ancient Arrow Project. I've taken every precaution to remain anonymous so I can't be traced. I'm convinced that these materials are released against the wishes of a secret organization that probably has powers that even our government is unaware of. Before the ACIO scientist, whom I will hereafter referred to as Dr. Anderson, had contacted me, I felt little or no interest in matters related to time travel, extraterrestrials, secret organizations, or anything else similar to these issues. When I initially heard the story, it seemed preposterous, but I kept my journalistic objectivity and met with Dr. Anderson and reluctantly concluded that it would be unlikely for an individual to fabricate this story with such detail and supporting evidence and then desire to remain anonymous. Dr. Anderson had brought files of photographs and drawings of odd-looking technologies that had strange symbols engraved on their outer casings. Research reports referencing the translation tables, cipher protocols, star charts, and dozens of memos from the ACIO department heads discussing the Ancient Arrow project. Everything, including about 400 pages of philosophical text, had an authenticity to it that I was unable to reproach or ignore. In fairness to those who will suggest I should investigate further in order to get independent corroboration, before I present these materials, let me just say that I am unable to corroborate this story because of the very nature of the ACIO. However, for whatever reason, I trust Dr. Anderson, who gave me these materials. He asked nothing from me. He desired no money or recognition. His only request was that I decide how best to bring these materials to the public. He counseled me not to investigate the ACIO because he was convinced the NSA would use misinformation tactics that would simply waste my time and make the goal of releasing these materials difficult, if not impossible. I've not contacted any other officer of the government because Dr. Anderson told me that this would be traced by the ACIO, who had high-level operatives in both the NSA and CIA, and at best would only invite misinformation tactics from one or both. I'm in possession of certain documents that I'll withhold from the Wingmaker's website, but if anything were to happen to me, I've arranged to have these documents shared with major media companies whom I know. These are my only safeguards in presenting these materials. My only interest is in the release of these materials to the public, and then they can decide what to do with them, or about them. They may desire to pressure their politicians to take other action. It's their choice. I'm convinced that this story is too important to be held in the hands of an elite organization whose only interest is to re-engineer the technologies found in the Ancient Arrow site and apply them for their own agenda, no matter how noble that agenda may be. I also realize that the internet service provider who is hosting this website may come under scrutiny, but if any pressure is exerted on the ISP to abandon its hosting service for this site, then this may also cause me to distribute the documents I referred to earlier. Let me be clear, these documents provide incontrovertible evidence of this secret organization known as the ACIO, and its elite directors are named and their real identities exposed. I've spent the last several months agonizing about how these materials should be presented, and it seemed most appropriate to place them on the internet to enable a global audience to access them. I have a close friend who created this website whom I trust completely. Other than that, no one knows what I have done here, including my website host. You might ask why I've chosen to reserve full-scale media disclosure of the materials given to me by Dr. Anderson. I can only tell you that I don't want to create a circus atmosphere surrounding this discovery. It may ultimately end up in the mass media, but for now my instincts are to keep a low profile for both these materials and myself. In doing so, I hope to preserve some sense of the dignity of these artifacts and let it grow from there. I've never been involved in any story approaching this magnitude of importance, and I'm certain that if you spend some time on this website and suspend your disbelief even for a few minutes, you will see how important a discovery this time capsule is. The best way you can help is to spread the word about this discovery and open the eyes of your political representatives. If you have a website if you have websites of your own, please link to the Wingmaker site. Dr. Anderson had warned me that the ACIO has an advanced version of a technology based on what he called remote viewing. As I understand it, remote viewing is the ability to ascertain the whereabouts of people through some sort of psychic insight by someone trained in this technology. I know this sounds far-fetched, but Dr. Anderson was insistent that they had this capability and that it was one of their most feared technologies by those within the ACIO. In effect, it was known to keep their personnel loyal. Unfortunately, this will force me to stay underground and remain very mobile over the next several months, so don't expect too much change to the website. Believe me, I know that this whole story may seem impossible, but I can only tell you that I've seen detailed drawings and photographs of the artifacts taken from the ancient Arrow site, and these are most assuredly, to my eyes, not of this time or world. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. Either the Wingmakers are real, or someone has gone to a lot of trouble to convince me otherwise. And again, I'm a simple journalist without any axe to grind relative to secret government operations, ETs, time travel, or alien artifacts. I'm not here to convert anyone. There is nothing to convert to. I simply want to disclose this material and let each individual absorb it as they choose. I will add additional documents and artifacts from the Ancient Arrow site when I feel it is safe to do so, but for now, there's enough material on this site to introduce anyone to the culture of the Wingmakers. I hope you take the time to immerse yourself in these materials. If you do, you may be surprised at the result. Anne, not my real name, written October 23rd, 1998. Okay, so going back to the very beginning, it says the following story was taken from the internet. A web search for Wingmakers will turn up the relevant pages that this story is based on. The editor cannot verify whether the following is true or not. What follows is the unedited transcript from the Wingmakers posted in December of 98. So this very well could just be fiction. That whole story about the I have heard actually of something, but I think it was more recent than this, popping up in a weird, obscure canyon, and I think it was in New Mexico. I may be wrong on that, but it was somewhere south of where I am, south and west of where I am, probably. But anyway, it was a strange obelisk, and it could have been a hoax, but there were pictures of it circulating, I don't know, a couple of years ago now. I think it was like a metallic obelisk that showed up out of the blue and then disappeared. Anyway, moving on. The Wingmakers and Time Travel Interview. In this section, you will find one of the 5 interviews conducted between Anne and Dr. Anderson back in December 1997, when Anne was first contacted with about the discovery of the Wingmakers time capsule. These are the exact transcripts from her tape-recorded interviews and are probably the best way to understand the nature of this discovery and its implications. What follows is a session I recorded of Dr. Anderson on December 27, 1997. He gave permission for me to record his answers to my questions. This was the first of 5 interviews that I was able to tape record before he left or disappeared. I have preserved these transcripts precisely as they occurred. No editing was performed, and I've tried my best to include the exact words and grammar used by Dr. Anderson. So now we get into an interview, and I don't know how long that interview is, or if it goes through all of the interviews. We'll just keep on reading. Okay, so Anne, are you comfortable? Dr. Anderson, yes, I'm fine and ready to begin when you are. Anne, you've made some remarkable claims with respect to the Ancient Arrow project. Can you please recount what your involvement in this project was and why you chose to leave it of your own free will? Dr. Anderson. I was selected to participate in the decoding and translation of the symbol pictures found at the site. I have a known expertise in languages and ancient texts. I am able to speak over 30 different languages fluently and another 12 or so languages that are officially extinct. Because of my skills in linguistics and my abilities to decode symbol pictures like petroglyphs and hieroglyphs, I was chosen for this task. I had been involved in the Ancient Arrow project from its very inception when the ACIO took over the project from the NSA. I was initially involved in the site discovery and its restoration, along with a team of 7 other scientists from the ACIO. We restored each of the 23 chambers of the Wingmaker's time capsule and cataloged all of their attendant artifacts. As the restoration was completed, I became increasingly focused on decoding their peculiar language and designing the translation indexes to English. It was a particularly vexing process because an optical disc was found in the 23rd chamber and it was impregnable to our technologies. We assumed that the optical disc held most of the information that the Wingmakers desired us to know about them. However, we couldn't figure out how to apply the symbol pictures found in their chamber paintings to unlock the disc. I decided to leave the project after I was successful in deducing the access code for the optical disc. Shortly thereafter, I became aware of what I can only describe as the presence of the Wingmakers. I felt as though they were visiting me, even assisting me in my work. And when you say visiting you, what evidence did you have that the Wingmakers might be visiting you? Excuse me. Dr. Anderson. I was spending 70 hours per week working on the decoding formulas for the symbol pictures, and this went on for about 8 months. During this time, I tried every conceivable combination to create an access code to the optical disc. I was convinced it was the only way to open it. I was also convinced that it was purposely made to be difficult, at least to our present-day brains. It was almost as though the struggle to decode their language was exercising a part of my brain or nervous system that was enabling me to communicate with them. I began to hear them speaking to me. It began as a word or two, then a sentence, maybe just once a day. It didn't make much sense, what I heard. But then one day I was working on a chamber painting and I saw something move in the painting. One of the symbols moved and it was absolutely not an illusion or trick of the light. Then I realized that the Wingmakers could interact with me, that they were time traveling to my time, and that somehow their paintings were actually portals in which they moved through time. It was then I began to hear their instructions, or more precisely, their thoughts. I was given mental images on how to use the Sumerian language to decode their own symbol pictures. I thought I was possibly going crazy. I felt like my mind was playing tricks on me, that I was working too hard and needed to take a holiday. But I listened to the voices because it seemed plausible what I was being instructed to do. When I finished with the access code and it worked, I knew then that I was indeed communicating with them. And did you tell anyone? I mean, about the fact that you were communicating with the Wingmakers? Dr. Anderson. I kept it a secret. I wasn't sure how I would be able to explain the phenomenon, and I didn't want to arouse suspicions, so I went about my business and began developing the translation indexes for the 8,110 pages of text that were discovered within the optical disc. It was essential that we had the letter-for-letter index in order to retain the meaning of their language. We called this translation granularity. This translation granularity. And as I started the process of translating the optical disc, I began to see fragment images of the Wingmakers, sort of like a holographic image that would appear and then disappear in a matter of seconds. They visited me a total of 3 times, always in my home at night, and told me that I had been selected to be their liaison or spokesperson. Of course, I asked them why me and not 15, and they said that 15 was unable to speak for them because he was already the pawn of the cordium. Okay. And tell me about 15. What is he like? Dr. Anderson. 15 is a genius of unparalleled intelligence and knowledge. He's the leader of the Labyrinth Group and has been since its inception in 1963. He was only 22 years old when he joined the ACIO in 1956. I think he was discovered early enough before he had a chance to establish a reputation in academic circles. He was a renegade genius who wanted to build computers that would be powerful enough to try time travel. Can you imagine how a goal like that in the mid-1950s must have sounded to his professors? Needless to say, he was not taken seriously and was essentially told to get in line with academic protocols and perform serious research. 15 came to the ACIO through an alliance it had with Bell Labs. Somehow Bell Labs heard about his genius and hired him, but he quickly outpaced their research agenda and wanted to apply his vision of time travel. And why was he so interested in time travel? Dr. Anderson. No one is absolutely sure, and his reasons may have changed over time. The accepted purpose was to develop blank slate technology, or BST. BST is a form of time travel that enables the rewrite of history at what are called intervention points. Intervention points are the causal energy centers that create a major event like the breakup of the Soviet Union or the NASA space program. BST is the most advanced technology, and clearly anyone who is in possession of BST can defend themselves against any aggressor. It is, as 15 was fond of saying, the freedom key. Remember that the ACIO was the primary interface with extraterrestrial technologies and how to adapt them into mainstream society as well as military applications. We were exposed to ETs and knew of their agenda. Some of these ETs scared the hell out of the ACIO. And why? Dr. Anderson. There were agreements between our government, specifically the NSA, to cooperate with an ET species commonly called the Greys in exchange for their cooperation to stay hidden and conduct their biological experiments under the cloak of secrecy. There was also a bungled technology transfer program, but that's another story. However, not all the Greys were operating within a unified agenda. There were certain groups of Greys that looked upon humans in much the same way as we look upon laboratory animals. They're abducting humans and animals and have been for the past 48 years. They're essentially conducting biological experiments to determine how their genetics can be made to be compatible with human and animal genetic structure. Their interests are not entirely understood, but if you accept their stated agenda, it's to perpetuate their species. Their species is nearing extinction, and they're fearful that their biological system lacks the emotional development to harness their technological prowess in a responsible manner. 15, I don't know why they used the number 15, but whatever. 15 was approached by the Greys in his role at the ACIO, and he desired to provide a full-scale technology transfer program, but 15 turned them down. He had already established a TTP with the Cordium, and felt that, and I've never heard of the Cordium either, CORTEUM, and felt that the Greys were too fractured organizationally to make good on their promises. Furthermore, the Cordium technology was superior in most regards to the Greys, with the possible exception of the Greys' memory implant and their genetic hybridization technologies. However, 15 and the entire Labyrinth group carefully considered an alliance with the Greys, if for no other reason than to have direct communication with regard to their stated agenda. 15 liked to be in the know, so eventually we did establish an alliance which consisted of a modest information exchange between us. We provided them with access to our information systems relative to genetic populations and their unique predisposition across a variety of criteria, including mental, emotional, and physical behaviors, and they provided us with their genetic findings. The Greys, and most extraterrestrials for that matter, communicate with humans exclusively through a form of telepathy, which we called suggestive telepathy, because to us it seemed that the Greys communicated in such a way that they were trying to lead a conversation to a particular end. In other words, they always had an agenda, and we were never certain if we were a pawn of their agenda or we arrived at conclusions that were indeed our own. I think that's why 15 didn't trust the Greys. He felt they used communication to manipulate outcomes to their own best interest in favor of shared interests. And because of this lack of trust, 15 refused to form an alliance or TTP that was comprehensive or integral to our operations at either the ACIO or the Labyrinth Group. And did the Greys know the existence of the Labyrinth Group? Dr. Anderson: I don't believe so. They were generally convinced that humans were not clever enough to cloak their agendas. Our analysis was that the Greys had invasive technologies that gave them a false sense of security as to their enemies' weaknesses. And I'm not saying that we were enemies, but we never trusted them. And this they undoubtedly knew. They also knew that the ACIO had technologies and intellects that were superior to the mainstream human population, and they had a modicum of respect, perhaps even fear, of our abilities. However, we never showed them any of our pure state technologies or engaged them in deep dialogues concerning cosmology or new physics. They were clearly interested in our information databases, and this was their primary agenda with respect to the ACIO. 15 was the primary interface with the Greys because they sensed a comparable intellect in him. The Greys looked at 15 as the equivalent of our planet's CEO. And how did 15 become the leader of both the ACIO and the Labyrinth Group? Dr. Anderson: he was the director of research. He was the director of research in 1958 when the cordium first became known to the ACIO. In this position, he was the logical choice to access their technology and determine its value to the ACIO. The cordium instantly took a liking to him, and one of 15's first decisions was to utilize the cordium intelligence accelerator technologies on himself. After about 3 months of experimentation, most of which was not in his briefing reports to the then current executive director of the ACIO, 15 became infused with a massive vision of how to create BST. The executive director was frightened by the intensity of 15's BST agenda and felt that it would divert too much of the ACIO's resources to a technology development program that was dubious. 15 was enough of a renegade that he enlisted the help of the cordium to establish the Labyrinth Group. The cordium were equally interested in BST for similar reasons as 15. The Freedom Key, as it was sometimes called, was established as the prime agenda of the Labyrinth Group, and the cordium and 15 were its initial members. Over the next several years, 15 selected the cream of the crop from the scientific core of the ACIO to undergo a similar intelligence accelerator program as he had, with the intention of developing a group of scientists that could, in cooperation with the cordium, successfully invent BST. The ACIO, in the opinion of 15, was too controlled by the NSA, and he felt the NSA was too immature in its leadership to responsibly deploy the technologies that he knew would be developed as an outgrowth of the Labyrinth Group. So 15 essentially plotted to take over the ACIO and was assisted by his new recruits to do so. This happened a few years before I became affiliated with the ACIO as a student and intern. My stepfather was very sympathetic to 15's agenda and was helpful in placing 15 as the executive director of the ACIO. There was a period of instability when this transition occurred, but after about a year, 15 was firmly in control of the agendas of both the ACIO and the Labyrinth Group. When I said what I said earlier, that he was viewed as the CEO of the planet, that's essentially who he is. And of the ETs who are interacting with humankind, only the Cordium understood the role of 15. He has a vision that is unique in that it is a blueprint for the creation of BST and is closing in on the right technology and human elements that will make this possible. And what makes BST such an imperative to 15 and the Labyrinth Group? Excuse me. Excuse me. Dr. Anderson, the ACIO has access to many ancient texts that contain prophecies of the earth. These have been accumulated over the past several hundred years through a network of secret organizations of which we are a part. These ancient texts are not known in academic institutions, the media, or mainstream society. They are quite powerful in their depictions of the 21st century. 15 was made aware of these texts early on when he became director of research for the ACIO, and this knowledge only fueled his desire to develop BST. And what were these prophecies and who made them? Dr. Anderson, the prophecies were made by a variety of people who are, for the most part, unknown or anonymous. So if I told you their names, you would have no recognition. You see, time travel can be accomplished by the soul from an observational level. That is to say that certain individuals can move in the realm of what we call vertical time and see future events with great clarity, but they are powerless to change them. There are also those individuals who have, in our opinion, come into contact with the wing makers and are provided messages about the future, which they have recorded in symbol pictures or extinct languages like Sumerian, Mayan, and Chakobsan. I have not heard of that one. Chakobsan. I have never heard of that language. The messages or prophecies that they made had several consistent strands or themes that were to occur in the early part of the 21st century, around the year 2011. Chief among these was the infiltration of the major governments of the world, including the United Nations, by an alien race. This alien race was a predator race with extremely sophisticated technologies that enabled them to integrate with the human species. That is to say, they could pose as humanoids, but they were truly a blend of human and android. This human race was prophesied to establish a world government and rule as its executive power. It was to be the ultimate challenge to humankind's collective intelligence and survival. These texts were kept from the public because they were too fear-provoking and would likely result in apocalyptic reprisals and mass paranoia. Maybe he's talking about Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. Anne, are you saying that what I think you're saying, that anonymous prophets from God knows where and when have seen a vision of our that anonymous prophets of God that anonymous prophets from God knows where and when have a vision of our future takeover by a race of robots? I mean, you do realize how unbelievable that sounds. It was a kind of a rough sentence to get out properly. Sorry. Dr. Anderson, Yes, I know it sounds unbelievable, but there are diluted versions of this very same prophecy in our religious texts. It's just that the alien race is portrayed as the Antichrist, as if the alien race was personified in the form of Lucifer. This form of the prophecy was acceptable to the gatekeepers of these texts, and so they allowed a form of the prophecy to be distributed, but the notion of an alien race was eliminated. And why and who exactly is it who's censoring what we can read and can't? Are you suggesting there's a secret editorial committee that previews books before their distribution? Dr. Anderson, this is a very complicated subject, and I could spend a whole day just acquainting you with the general structure of this control of information. Most of the world's major libraries have collections of information that are not available to the general public. Only scholars are authorized to view these materials, and usually only on site, kind of like a rare books reading room. In the same way, there are manuscripts that were controversial and posited theories that were sharply different from the accepted belief systems of their day. These manuscripts, or writings, were banished by a variety of sources, including the Vatican, universities, governments, and various institutions. These writings are sought out by secret organizations that have a mission to collect and retain this information. These organizations are very powerful and well funded, and they can purchase these original manuscripts for a relatively small amount of money. Most of the writings are believed to be hocus pocus anyway, so libraries are often very willing to part with them for an endowment or modest contribution. Also, most of these are original writings, having never been published, being that they originated from a time before the printing press. There is a network of secret organizations that are loosely connected through the financial markets and their interests in worldly affairs. They are generally centers of power for the monetary systems within their respective countries and are elitists of the first order. The ACIO is affiliated with this network only because it is rightly construed that the ACIO has the best technology in the world, and this technology can be deployed for financial gain through market manipulation. Ugh, excuse me. As for an editorial committee, no, this secret network of organizations doesn't review books before publication. Its holdings are exclusively in ancient manuscripts and religious texts. They have a very strong interest in prophecy because they believe in the concept of vertical time, and they have a vested interest in knowing the macroevolutionary changes that can affect the economy. You see, for most of them, the only game on this planet that is worth playing is the acquisition of ever-increasing wealth and power through an orchestrated manipulation of the key variables that drive the economic engines of our world. They are talking about Klaus Schwab. And so if they're so smart about the future and they believe these prophecies, what are they doing to help protect us from these alien invaders? Dr. Anderson, they help fund the ACIO. This collective of organizations has enormous wealth, more than most governments can comprehend. The ACIO provides them with the technology to manipulate many money markets and rake in tens of billions of dollars every year. I don't even know the scope of their collective wealth. The ACIO also receives funding from the sale of its diluted technologies to these organizations for the sake of their own security and protection. We've devised the world's finest security systems, which are both undetectable and impregnable to outside forces like the CIA and the former KGB. The reason they fund the ACIO is that they believe 15 is the most brilliant man alive, and they're aware of his general agenda to develop BST. They see this technology as the ultimate safeguard against the prophecy and their ability to retain relative control of the world and national economies. They also know 15's strategic position with alien technologies and hope that between his genius and the alien technologies that the ACIO is assimilating, that BST is possible to develop before the prophecy occurs. But why the sudden interest in the Wingmaker's time capsule? How does it play a role in all of this BST stuff? Dr. Anderson, initially we didn't know what the connection was between the Ancient Arrow project and the BST imperative. You have to understand that the time capsule was a collection of 23 chambers literally carved into a canyon wall in the middle of nowhere about 80 miles southeast of Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. It is without a doubt the most amazing archaeological find of all time. Its scientists were allowed to examine this site, or if scientists were allowed to examine this site with all of its artifacts intact, they would be in awe of this incredible find. Our preliminary assumptions were that this site was a time capsule of sorts left behind by an extraterrestrial race who had visited Earth in the 8th century, but we couldn't understand why the art was so clearly representative of Earth if it were a time capsule. The only logical conclusion was that it represented a future version of humanity. But we weren't certain of this until we figured out how to access the optical disc and translate the first set of documents from the disc. Once we had a clear understanding of how the Wingmakers wanted to be understood, we began to test their claims by analyzing their chamber paintings, poetry, music, philosophy, and artifacts. This analysis made us fairly certain that they were authentic, which meant that they were not only time travelers, but that they were also in possession of a form of BST. And why did you assume they had BST? Dr. Anderson, we believed it took them a minimum of 2 months to create their time capsule. This would have required them to open and hold open a window of time and physically operate within the selected time frame. This is a fundamental requirement of BST. Additionally, it is necessary to be able to select the intervention points with precision, both in terms of time and space. We believed they had this capability, and they had proven it with their time capsule. Furthermore, the technological artifacts they had left behind were evidence of a technology that was so far in advance of our own that we couldn't even understand them. None of the extraterrestrial races we were aware of had technologies so advanced that we could not probe them, assimilate them, and reverse engineer them. The technologies left behind in the Ancient Arrow site were totally enigmatic and impervious to our probes. We considered them so advanced that they were quite literally indiscernible and unusable, which, though it may sound odd, is a clear sign of an extremely advanced technology. So we decided that the Wingmakers were in possession of BST. Oh, so you decided. But how did you think you were going to acquire their knowledge? Dr. Anderson, we didn't know, and to this day the answer to that question is elusive. The ACIO placed its best resources on this project for more than 4 years. I posited the theory that the time capsule was an encoded communication device. I began to theorize that when one went through the effort to interact with the various symbol pictures and immerse themselves in the time capsule's art and philosophy, it affected the central nervous system in a way that it improved fluid intelligence. It was, in my opinion, the principal goal of the time capsule to boost fluid intelligence so that BST was not only able to be developed but also utilized. And you lost me. What is the relationship between BST and fluid intelligence? Dr. Anderson, BST is a specific form of time travel. Science fiction treats time travel as something that is relatively easy to design and develop and relatively one-dimensional. Time travel is anything but one-dimensional. As advanced in technology as the Cordium and Greys are, they have yet to produce the equivalent of BST. They are able to time travel in its elemental form, but they can't interact with the time that they travel to. That is to say, they can go back in time, but once there, they cannot alter the events of that time because they are in a passive observational mode. The Labyrinth Group has conducted 7 time travel experiments over the past 30 years. One clear outcome from these tests is that the person performing the time travel is an integral variable to the technology used to time travel. In other words, the person and the technology need to be precisely matched. The Labyrinth Group, for all it knows, already possesses BST, but lacks the time traveler equivalent of an astronaut who can appropriately finesse the technology in real time and make the split-second adjustments the BST requires. The Labyrinth Group has never seriously considered the human element of BST and how it is integral to the technology itself. There were some of us who were involved in the translation indexes of the Wingmakers who began to feel that that was the nature of the time capsule, to enhance fluid intelligence and activate new sensory inputs that were critical to the BST experience. But I still don't understand what it was that led you to that conclusion. I'm going to pause for just a second and see. This goes on and on and on, this interview. I think it's the whole rest of the chapter. Yeah. It's the whole rest of the chapter. So we've got 23 pages left to go. Dr. Anderson, when we had, so her question was, but I still don't understand what it was that led you to that conclusion. Dr. Anderson, when we had translated the first 30 pages of text from the optical disc, we learned some interesting things about the Wingmakers and their philosophy, namely that they claimed that the three-dimensional, five-sensory domain that humans have adjusted to is the reason we are only using a fractional portion of our intelligence. They claimed that the time capsule would be the bridge from the three-dimensional, five-sensory domain to the multi-dimensional, seven-sensory domain. In my opinion, they were saying that in order to apply BST, the traveler needed to operate from the multi-dimensional seven-sensory domain. Otherwise, BST was the proverbial camel through the eye of the needle, or in other words, impossible. And this at least seems plausible to me. Why was it so hard to believe for the ACIO? Dr. Anderson, this initiative was really conducted by the Labyrinth Group and not the ACIO, so I'm making that distinction just to be accurate and not to be critical of your question. For 15, it was hard to believe that a time capsule could activate or construct a bridge that would lead someone to become a traveler. This seemed like an extraordinarily remote possibility. He felt that the time capsule may hold the technology to enable BST, but he didn't believe it was merely an educational or developmental experience. The other outcome of immersion in the time capsule's contents was a sense of loyalty to the Wingmakers' philosophy and approach to life. I found myself becoming less and less technology-centric and more spiritually focused. There was a sense of entrainment caused by their teaching that I couldn't explain. For whatever reason, I began to lose my objectivity as a researcher and felt myself more of an advocate of the wingmakers. Anne, what do you mean by the word advocate? Dr. Anderson, just that I was sympathetic to what I construed as the wingmakers' agenda. Anne, what was, or perhaps more appropriately, what is their agenda in your opinion? Dr. Anderson, in my opinion, their agenda is to activate through their time capsules the new consciousness that enables BST. I believe the wingmakers are trying to help us develop our consciousness, our human abilities, so we're able to utilize BST successfully as a defensive weapon. But more generally, I think this new consciousness is also in itself a defensive weapon. Anne. But if the wingmakers are time travelers themselves, in possession of BST, why can't they deal with the hostile aliens in 2011? Dr. Anderson, I don't know. Believe me, I've thought about that one a great deal, as has the team working on the project. Perhaps BST isn't their primary concern for us, but rather helping us move from the three-dimensional 5-sensory domain to the more potent multi-dimensional 7-sensory consciousness. Perhaps they're unable to access the intervention points because they lack some critical piece of information, or perhaps they're unaware of the need because we already solved it in the year 2011. All I know is that we have about 6 different hypotheses and we just don't have enough data to make a conclusion. Bear in mind that only about 7% of the text from the optical disc has been secured and translated to English. The ACIO is missing much of the information yet that will allow it to understand the true nature of the time capsules, and the purpose of the wingmakers. And let's take a short break and resume after we've had a chance to grab some more coffee, okay? Dr. Anderson, okay. Breaking for about 10 minutes, resume interview. And that is a good idea. I am going to go ahead and take a quick break myself because I really would like to just finish this tonight. But I've got 21 pages to go, so not sure that I will be able to. But I will get up and move around and guzzle some water and figure out what is in my shoe that's sticking me in the foot. And I'll be back in just a couple minutes. Okay, shall we get back to it? All right. Got a long way to go to finish this chapter, so we'll keep on it. All right, so, Anne, during the break, I asked you about the network of secret organizations you mentioned that the ACIO, is part of. Can you elaborate on this network and what its agenda is? Dr. Anderson, there are many organizations that have noble exteriors and secret interiors. In other words, they may have external agendas that they promote to their employees, members, and the media, but there is also a secret and well-hidden agenda that only the inner core of the organization is aware of. The outer rings, or protective membership, as they're sometimes referred to, are simply window dressings to cover up the real agenda of the organization. The IMF, Foreign Relations Committee, NSA, KGB, CIA, World Bank, and the Federal Reserve are all examples of these organizational structures. Their inner core is knitted together to form an elitist secret society with its own culture, economy, and communication system. These are the powerful and wealthy who have joined forces in order to manipulate world political, economic, and social systems to facilitate their own agenda. The agenda, as I know it, is primarily concerned with control of the world economy and its vital resources: oil, gold, gas reserves, platinum, diamonds, etc. This secret network has utilized technology from the ACIO for the purpose of securing control of the world economy. They're well into the process of designing an integrated world economy based on a digital equivalent of paper currency. We've been hearing about that, haven't we? This infrastructure is in place, but it is taking more time than expected to implement because of the resistance of competitive forces who don't understand the exact nature of this secret network but intuitively sense its existence. These competitive forces are generally businesses and politicians who are affiliated with the transition to a global digital economy but want to have some control of the infrastructure development, and because of their size and position in the marketplace can exert significant influence on this secret network. The only organization that I'm aware of that is entirely independent as to its agenda, and therefore the most powerful or alpha organization, is the Labyrinth Group. And they are in this position because of their pure state technologies and the intellect of its members. All other organizations, whether part of this secret network of organizations or powerful multinational corporations, are not in control of the execution of their agenda. They are essentially locked in a competitive battle. But if this is all true, then is 15 essentially running this secret network? Dr. Anderson, no, he's not. He's not interested in the agenda of this secret network. He's bored by it. He has no interest in power or money. He's only attracted to the mission of building BST to thwart hostile alien attacks that have been prophesied for 12,000 years. He believes that the only mission worth deploying the Labyrinth Group's considerable intellectual power is the development of the ultimate defense weapon, or Freedom Key. He's convinced that only the Labyrinth Group has a chance to do this before it's too late. You have to remember that the Labyrinth Group consists of 118 humans and approximately 200 Cortium. The intellectual ability of this group, aligned behind the focused mission of developing BST before the alien takeover, is truly a remarkable undertaking that makes the Manhattan Project look like a kindergarten social party in comparison. And perhaps I'm exaggerating a bit for effect, but I'm pointing out that 15 is leading an agenda that is far more critical than anything that has been undertaken in the history of humankind. And so if 15 is running his own agenda, and it's just as you say it is, why would you defect from such an organization? Dr. Anderson. The ACIO has a memory implant technology that can effectively eliminate select memories with surgical precision. For example, this technology could eliminate your recall of this interview without disrupting any other memories before or after. You could simply sense some missing time, perhaps, but nothing more could be recalled, if that. My intuition cautioned me that I was a candidate to have this procedure because of the behaviors I was exhibiting in deference to the wingmakers. In other words, I was believed to be a sympathizer of their culture, philosophy, and mission, what I knew of it. That made me a potential risk to the project. The Labyrinth Group, in a very real sense, feared its own membership because of their enormous intellect and ability to be cunning and clever. Shut that off for a minute. There we go. Sorry. Cunning and clever. This imprinted a constant state of paranoia, which meant that technology was deployed to help ensure compliance to the agenda of 15. Most of these technologies were invasive, and the members of the Labyrinth Group willingly submitted to the invasion in order to more effectively cope with the paranoia. Several months ago, I began to systematically shut down these invasive technologies, in part to see what the reaction of 15 would be, and partly because I was tired of the paranoia. As I was doing this, it became obvious to me that the suspicions were escalating, until it was simply a matter of time before they would ask me to subject myself to memory therapy. What I had learned from the Wingmaker's time capsule is not something I want to forget. I don't want to give this information up. It has become a central part of what I believe and how I want to live out my life. Anne, couldn't you have simply defected and not sought out a journalist who will want to get this story out? I mean, couldn't you have simply gone to an island and lived out your life and never disclosed the existence of the Labyrinth Group and the Wingmakers? Dr. Anderson, you don't understand. The Labyrinth Group is untouchable. They have no fears about what I divulge to the media. Their only concern is the terrible precedence of defection. I'm the first. No one has ever left before, and their fear is that if I defect and get away successfully, others will too. And once that happens, the mission is compromised, and BST may never happen. 15 and his directors take their mission very seriously. They are fanatics of the First Order, which is both good and bad. Good in the sense that they're focused and working hard to develop BST. Bad in the sense that fanaticism breeds paranoia. My reasons for seeking out a journalist like you and sharing this knowledge is that I don't want the Wingmaker's time capsules to be locked away from humanity. I think its contents should be shared. I think that was their purpose. Anne, this will seem like a strange question, but why would the Wingmakers hide their time capsule and then encode its content in such an extraordinarily complex way if they wanted this to be shared with humanity? Look, if the average citizen had found this time capsule, or even a government laboratory, what's the chance they would have been able to decipher it and access the optical disc? Dr. Anderson, it's not such a strange question, actually. We asked it ourselves. It seemed clear to the Labyrinth Group that it had been the chosen organization to unlock the optical disc. To answer your question directly, had the time capsule been discovered by another organization, chances are excellent that its optical disc would never be accessed. Somehow, this coincidence that the time capsule ended up in the hands of the Labyrinth Group seems to be an orchestrated process, and even 15 agreed with that assessment. What happened to my... Oh, my caption link ran out. Let me get a new one. I want to be consistent and have those, but I just noticed that it had run out. So bear with me a moment. I will fix that. that should fix it. There we go. All right. Is everything back up and running? Yes, it is. Okay. Sorry about that. And so 15 felt that the Wingmakers had selected the Labyrinth group to decide the fate of the time capsule's content. Dr. Anderson, yes. And then wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that 15 wanted to learn more about the contents of the time capsule before he released it to the public through the NSA or some other government agency? Dr. Anderson, no, it's doubtful that 15 would ever release any information about the Ancient Arrow project to anyone outside of the ACIO. He's not one to share information that he feels is proprietary to the Labyrinth group, particularly if it has anything to do with BST. And so now that you've made these statements, isn't it going to affect the ACIO? Isn't someone going to ask questions and start poking around looking for answers? Dr. Anderson, perhaps, but I know too much about their security systems, and there's no way that a political inquiry will find them. And there's no way the secret network of organizations I mentioned earlier could exert any influence over them. They're completely indebted to the ACIO for technologies that permit them to manipulate economic markets. They, the ACIO and Labyrinth Group, are, as I said before, untouchable. Their only concern will be defection, the loss of intellectual capital. And what effect will your defection have on the ACIO or the Labyrinth Group? Dr. Anderson, very little. Most of my contributions with respect to the time capsule have been completed. There are some other projects having to do with the encryption technologies that I developed, and these will be more significant in their impact. And can you elaborate on the Wingmakers and who you think they are or represent? Dr. Anderson, I don't know who they are, but they represent themselves as human time travelers from the middle part of the 28th century. They could very well be the future version of the Labyrinth Group or some other powerful organization. They seem to have a very well integrated subculture in that their language is clearly a combination of many extinct languages which they could only have knowledge of if they had access to ACIO information systems or were indeed time travelers, or both, I suppose. Assuming they're accurately representing themselves, they are very advanced technologically. The Labyrinth Group holds that BST is the most advanced technology conceivable. Anyone who possesses it and can successfully utilize it is clearly more advanced than our contemporary human culture or any of the extraterrestrials we are currently interfacing with. But if the Wingmakers are so advanced technologically, why time capsules? Why not just appear one day and announce whatever it is they want to share? Why this game of hide and seek and hidden time capsules? Dr. Anderson, their motives are not clear. I think they planted these time capsules as their way to bring culture and technology from their time to ours, and they decided to do this by leaving behind these miraculous structures or time capsules that, once discovered, would lead people to a new philosophy or level of understanding. I think they're as interested in our philosophical outlook as our discovery of BST, perhaps more so. As for why don't they just show up and give us the information, this, I think, is their genius. They've created 7 time capsules and placed them in various parts of the world. I believe this is all part of the master plan or strategy to engage our intellects and spirits in a way that has never been done before, to demonstrate how art, culture, science, spirituality, how all of these things are connected. I believe they want us to discover this, not to be told. If they simply arrived here in your living room and announced they were the wing makers from the 28th century, I suspect you'd be more amazed about their personalities and physical characteristics and what life is like in their time. That's assuming you even believe them. The aspect of what they wanted to impart, culture, art, technology, philosophy, spirituality, these items would get lost in the phenomena of their presence. Also, in the text that I had translated, it was apparent that the wing makers had time traveled on many occasions. They interacted with people from many different times and called themselves culture bearers. They were probably mistaken as angels or even gods. For all we know, their reference in religious texts may indeed be frequent. And so you think they intend that these time capsules be shared with the whole of humanity? Dr. Anderson, you mean the wing makers? And yes, Dr. Anderson, I don't know with absolute certainty, but I think they should be shared. I don't have anything to personally gain from getting this information out to the public. It goes against everything I've been trained for and places me at risk, and at the very least disrupts my lifestyle irreparably. To me, the Ancient Arrow time capsule is the single greatest discovery in the history of humankind. Discoveries of this magnitude should be in the public domain. They shouldn't be selfishly secured and retained by the ACIO or any other organization. And then why are these discoveries and the whole situation with ETs kept from the public? Dr. Anderson, the people who have access to this information like the sense of being unique and privileged. That's the psychology of secret organizations and why they flourish. Privileged information is the ambrosia of elitists. It gives them a sense of power, and the human ego loves to feed from the trough of power. They would never confess to this, but the drama of the ET contact and other mysterious or paranormal phenomena is extremely compelling and of vital interest to anyone who is of a curious nature, particularly politicians and scientists. And by keeping these subjects in private rooms behind closed doors with all the secrecy surrounding it, it creates a sense of drama that is missing in most other pursuits. So you see, Anne, the drama of secrecy is very addictive. Now, of course, the reason that they would tell you for keeping this out of the public domain is for purposes of national security, economic stability, and social order. And to some extent, I suppose there's truth to that, but it's not the real reason. And does our president know about the ET situation, Anderson? Dr. Anderson? Yes. And what does he know? Dr. Anderson. He knows about the Greys. He knows about ET bases that exist on planets within our solar system. He knows about the Martians. And, good God, you're not going to tell me that little green men from Mars actually exist, are you? Dr. Anderson, if I were to tell you that what I know about the ET situation, I'm afraid I would lose my credibility in your eyes. Believe me, the reality of the ET situation is much more complex and dimensional than I have time tonight to report. And if I give you a superficial rendering, I think you'd find it impossible to believe. So I'm going to tell you partial truths, and I'm going to be very careful in my choice of words. The Martians are a humanoid race fashioned from the same gene pool as we. They live in the underground bases within Mars, and their numbers are small. Some have already immigrated to Earth, and with some superficial adjustments to their physical appearance, they could pass for a human in broad daylight. President Clinton is aware of these matters and has considered alternative ways to communicate with ETs. To date, a form of telepathy has been used as the primary communication interface. However, this is not a trusted form of communication, especially in the minds of our military personnel. Virtually every radio telescope on the globe has been, at one time or another, used to communicate with ETs. This has had mixed results, but there have been successes, and our president is aware of these. And then is Clinton involved in the secret network you mentioned earlier? Dr. Anderson, not knowingly, but he is clearly an important influencer and is treated with great care by high-level operatives within the network. Anne, so you're saying he's manipulated? Dr. Anderson, it depends on your definition of manipulation. He can make any decision he desires. Ultimately, he has the power to make or influence all decisions relative to national security, economic stability, and social order. But he generally seeks inputs from his advisors, and high-level operatives from this secret network advise his advisors. The network and its operatives seldom get too close to political power because it's in the media fishbowl, and they disdain the scrutiny of the media and the public in general. You can tell this was written in the late 90s, right? We're talking about Clinton as president. Clinton, therefore, is not manipulated, but simply advised. The information he receives is sometimes doctored to lead his decision in the direction that the network feels is most beneficial to all of its members. To the extent that information is doctored, then I think you could say that the president is manipulated. He has he has precious little time to perform fact-checking and fully evaluate alternative plans, which is why the advisors are so important and influential. And, okay, so he's manipulated, at least by my definition. Is this also happening with other governments like Japan and Great Britain, for instance? Dr. Anderson, yes, this network is not just national or even global. It extends to other races and species, so its influence is quite broad, as are the influences that impinge upon it. It is a two-way street. As I said before, the Labyrinth Group operates the only agenda that is truly independent, and because of its goal, it's permitted to have this independence, though in all honesty, there's nothing that anyone could do to prevent it, with the possible exception of the Wingmakers. And so all the world's governments are being manipulated by this secret network of organizations. Who are these organizations? You mentioned some of them, but who are the rest? Is the mob involved? Dr. Anderson, I could name most of them, but to what end? Most you wouldn't recognize or find any reference to. They are like the Labyrinth Group. Had you ever heard of it before? Of course not. Even the current management of the NSA is not aware of the ACIO. At one time, they were, but that was over 35 years ago, and people circulate out of the organization, but still retain their allegiance to the secret and privileged information network. And no, absolutely, there is no mob or organized crime influence in this network. The network uses organized crime as a shield in some instances, but organized crime operates through intimidation, not stealth. Its leaders possess average intelligence and associate with information systems that are obsolete and therefore non-strategic. The organized crime network is a much less sophisticated version of the network I was referring to. And, okay, let's get back to the Wingmakers for a moment. And I apologize for my scattered questions tonight. It's just that there's so much I want to know that I'm finding it very difficult to stay on the subject of the Ancient Arrow Project. Dr. Anderson, you don't need to apologize. I understand how this must sound to you. I'm still wide awake, so you don't have to worry about the time. This is supposed to be unedited. Okay. And So let's talk a little bit about your impressions or insights into the Wingmakers' philosophy and culture. Dr. Anderson, first of all, again, I want to remind you that only a fraction of their writings have been translated, so whatever insights I may have are limited by a partial understanding, at best, of their culture and philosophy. Also, I want to remind you that the Wingmakers may not represent the broader culture and philosophy of their time. Our interpretation was that they represented a subset or subculture of their time. With those qualifications, I'll say that the Wingmakers have the benefit of about 750 additional years of evolutionary thought. We presume that humans of this era are active members of the Federation of our galaxy. And what's the Federation? I haven't heard you talk about it before. Dr. Anderson, each galaxy has a federation or loose-knit organization that includes all sentient life forms on every planet within the galaxy. It would be the equivalent of the United Nations of the galaxy. This federation has both invited members and observational members. Invited members are those species that have managed to behave in a responsible manner as stewards of their planet and combine both the technology, philosophy, and culture that enable them to communicate as a global entity that has a unified agenda. Observational members are species who are fragmented and are still wrestling with one another over land, power, money, culture, and a host of other things that prevent them from forming a unified world government. The human race on planet Earth is such a species, and for now it is simply observed by the Federation, but is not invited into its policy making and economic systems. And are you saying that our galaxy has a form of government and an economic system? Dr. Anderson, yes, but if I tell you about this, you will lose track of what I really wanted to share with you about the Wingmakers. And I'm sorry for taking us off track again, but this is just too amazing to ignore. If there's a federation of cooperative, intelligent species, why couldn't they take care of these hostile aliens in the year 2011, or at least help us? Dr. Anderson, the Federation doesn't intrude on a species of any kind. It is truly a facilitating force, not a governing force, with a military presence. That is to say, they will observe and help with suggestions, but they will not intervene on our behalf. And is this like the Prime Directive as it's portrayed in Star Trek? Dr. Anderson, no, it's more like a parent who wants its children to learn how to fend for themselves so they can become greater contributors to the family. Anne, but wouldn't a hostile takeover of Earth affect the Federation? Dr. Anderson, most definitely, but the Federation does not preempt a species' own responsibility for survival and the perpetuation of its genetics. You see, at an atomic level, our physical bodies are made quite literally from stars. At a subatomic level, our minds are non-physical repositories of a galactic mind. At a sub-subatomic level, our souls are non-physical repositories of God or the intelligence that pervades the universe. Excuse me. The Federation believes that the human species can defend itself because it is of the stars' galactic mind and God. If we were unsuccessful and the hostility spread to other parts of our galaxy, then the Federation would take notice and its members would defend their sovereignty, and this has happened many times. And in this process of defense, new technologies arise, new friendships are formed, and new confidence is embedded in the galactic mind. That's why the Federation performs as they do. And doesn't BST exist somewhere within the Federation? Dr. Anderson, yes, it probably does in one of the planets closer to our galactic core. And so why doesn't the Federation help? You said they could help, didn't you? Dr. Anderson, yes, they can help, and the cordium are IMs, or invited members, and they are helping us. But they themselves do not possess the BST technology. This is a very special technology that is permitted to be acquired by a species that intends to use it only as a defensive weapon. And herein is the challenge. And who does the permitting? Are you saying the Federation decides when a species is ready to acquire BST? Dr. Anderson: no, I think it has to do with God. And I don't know why, but I have a hard time believing that you believe in God. Hey, Nambro. At a subatomic level, I love this stuff. This stuffed crust pizza and beer. Every atom, every protein, every fat, every carb. I will decide when a species is ready to acquire stuffed crust pizza. Good to have you in here, Nambro. Dr. Anderson: well, I do. And furthermore, so I don't know if you've been here the whole time, Nambro. Um, this is a transcript from a website that may or may not be total fiction. So I do intend to actually look it up and see if it exists and try to judge for myself. But it's a transcript of an interview of a doctor that defected from a secret organization called the ACIO. So anyway, I don't know why, but I have a hard time believing you believe in God. Dr. Anderson: well, I do, and furthermore, so does everyone within the Labyrinth group, including 15. We've seen far too many evidences of God or a higher intelligence that we can't dispute its existence. It would be impossible to deny based on what we've observed in our laboratories. And so God decides when we're ready to responsibly use BST. Do you think he'll decide before 2011? I admit there was a tone of sarcasm in this question. Remember, this was written in 1999. Dr. Anderson: you see, and the Labyrinth group is hopeful that the readiness of the entire species isn't the determining factor, but that a subgroup within the species might be allowed to acquire the technology as long as it was able to protect it from all non-approved forces. This subgroup is hoped to be the Labyrinth group, and it's one of the reasons why 15 has invested so much of the ACIO's resources into security systems. Wow. We got a ways to go here, folks. And you didn't really answer my question, though. Do you think it can be developed in 12 years? Dr. Anderson: I don't know. Certainly I hope so, but BST is not our only line of defense. The Labyrinth group has devised many defensive weapons, not all of which I'll describe to you. The alien race foretold in prophecy is not even aware of Earth at this time. They originate from a different galaxy altogether. The prophecy is that they will send probes to our galaxy and determine that Earth is the best genetic library and natural resource repository in the Milky Way that can be quickly assimilated. They will visit Earth in 2011. The prophecy says they will befriend our governments and utilize the United Nations as an ally. They will set about orchestrating a unified world government through the United Nations, and when the first elections are held in 2018, they will overtake the United Nations and rule as the world government. This will be done through trickery and deception. I mention these prophecies because they're quite specific as to the dates, and so we have the equivalent of 19 years to produce and deploy BST. Ideally, yes, we'd like to have it completed in order to interface with the intervention points for this race when it decided to cross over into our galaxy. We would like to cause them to choose a different galaxy or abandon their quest altogether, but it may be impossible to determine this intervention point. You see, the memory implant technology developed by the Labyrinth Group can be utilized in conjunction with BST. We can define the intervention point when our galaxy was selected as a target to colonize, enter that time and place, and impose a new memory on their leadership to divert them from our galaxy. And either I'm getting tired or this just got a lot more confusing. You're saying that the Labyrinth Group already has scenarios to nip this thing in the bud, to prevent this marauding group of aliens from even entering our galaxy? How do you know where they are? Dr. Anderson. To answer your question, I would need to explain with much more granularity the precise nature of BST and how it differs from time travel. I'll try to explain it as simply as I can, but it's complex and you need to let go of some of your preconceived notions of time and space. You see, time is not exclusively linear as when it's depicted in a timeline. Time is vertical, with every moment in existence stacked upon the next and all coinciding with one another. In other words, time is the collective of all moments of all experience simultaneously existing within non-time, which is usually referred to as eternity. Vertical time infers that one can select a moment of experience and use time and space as the portal through which they make their selection real. Once the selection is made, time and space become the continuity factor that changes vertical time into horizontal time or conventional time. And you lost me. How is vertical time different from horizontal time? Dr. Anderson. Vertical time has to do with the simultaneous experience of all time, and horizontal time has to do with the continuity of time in linear, moment-by-moment experiences. And so you're saying that every experience I've ever had or will ever have exists right now, that the past and future are actually the present, that I'm just too brainwashed to see it? Dr. Anderson, as I said before, this is a complex subject, and I'm afraid that if I spend the time explaining it to you now, we will lose track of more important information like BST. Perhaps if I were to explain the nature of BST, most of your questions would be answered in the process. Yeah, okay. And then tell me about what BST is. Given what the acronym stands for, I assume it means something like wipe out an event and change the course of history, right? Dr. Anderson, let me try to explain it this way. Time travel can be observational in nature. In this regard, the ACIO and other organizations, even individual citizens, have the ability to time travel. But this form of time travel is passive. It's not equivalent to BST. In order to precisely alter the future, you have to be able to interact with vertical time, paging through it like a book until you find the precise page or intervention point relevant to your mission. This is where it gets so complex because to interact with vertical time means you will alter the course of horizontal time, and understanding the alterations and their scope and implication requires extremely complex modeling. This is why the Labyrinth Group aligned itself with the Cordium. Its computing technology has processing capabilities that are about 3,200 times more powerful than our best supercomputers. This enables us to create organic, highly complex scenario models. These models tell us the most probable intervention points once we've gathered the relevant data, and what the most probable outcomes will be if we invoke a specific scenario. Like most complex technologies, BST is a composite technology having 5 discrete and interrelated technologies. The first technology is a specialized form of remote viewing. This is the technology that enables a trained operative to mentally move into vertical time and observe events and even listen to conversations related to an inquiry mode. The operative is invisible to all people within the time they are traveling to, so it's perfectly safe and unobtrusive. The intelligence gained from this technology is used to determine the application of the other 4 technologies. This is the equivalent of intelligence gathering. The second technology that is key to BST is the equivalent of memory implant. The ACIO refers to this technology as a memory restructure procedure, or MRP. MRP is the technology that allows a memory to be precisely eliminated in the horizontal time sequence and a new memory inserted in its place. The new memory is welded to the existing memory structure of the recipient. You see, events small and large occur from a single thought, which becomes a persistent memory, which in turn becomes a causal energy center that leads the development and materialization of the thought into reality, into horizontal time. MRP can remove the initial thought and thereby eliminate the persistent memory that causes events to occur. The third technology consists of defining the intervention point. In every major decision, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of intervention points in horizontal time as a thought unfolds and moves through its development phase. However, in vertical time, there is only one intervention point, or what we sometimes call the causal seed. In other words, if you can access vertical time intelligence, you can identify the intervention point that is the causal seed. This technology identifies the most probable intervention points and ranks their priority. It enables focus of the remaining technologies. The fourth technology is related to the third. It's the scenario modeling technology. This technology helps to assess the various intervention points as to their least invasive ripple effects to the recipients. In other words, which intervention point, if applied to a scenario model, produces the desired outcome with the least disruption to unrelated events. The scenario modeling technology is a key element of BST, because without it, BST would cause significant disruption to a society or entire species. The fifth and most puzzling technology is the interactive time travel technology. The Labyrinth group has the first 4 technologies in a ready state, waiting for the interactive time travel technology to become operational. This technology requires an operative system, an operative or a team of operatives to be able to physically move into vertical time and be inserted in the precise space and time where the optimal intervention point has been determined. From there, the operatives must perform a successful MRP, mind reassignment, mind realignment, restructure, mind restructuring procedure. Okay. MRP, and return to their original time in order to validate mission success. And I've been listening to this explanation, and I think I even understand some of it, but it sounds so surreal to me, Dr. Anderson. I'm at a loss to explain how I'm feeling right now. This is all so strange. It's so big, enormous. I can't believe this is going on somewhere on the same planet that I live. Before this interview, I was worried about balancing my checkbook and when my damn car would ever be fixed. This is just too strange. Dr. Anderson, maybe we should take another break and warm up our coffee. Anne, signing off for a coffee break. We've got 9 pages to go. Can we do it? Can I make it through 9 more? Ay, 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 ay. I'm going to take a few sips. It's interesting as hell, but it's a long chapter. And it could be complete fiction. It could be real. It could be some combination. Part of me wants it to be real. All right. Here we go. Break for about 10 minutes, resume interview. And if the Labyrinth group has 4 of the 5 technologies ready to go and is only awaiting the interactive the interactive part, they must have scenario models and intervention points already established for how they plan to deal with this alien race. Do they? Dr. Anderson. Yes, they have about 40 scenario models and perhaps as many as 5 to 8 intervention points defined. And if there are that many, there must be a priority establishment. What's the most probable scenario model? Dr. Anderson. I will be brief on this point because it is such classified information that only the 14X personnel and 15 know this. My classification is 12X, and so I get diluted reports and quite possibly misinformation with regard to our scenario modeling. About all I can tell you is that we know from both of the prophecies and our remote viewing technology a significant amount of information about this race. For example, we know that it hails from a galaxy that our Hubble telescope has examined as thoroughly as possible, and we've charted it as extensively as possible. We know that it is 2.6 million light years away, and that the species is a synthetic race, a mixture of genetic creation and technology. It possesses a hive mentality, but individual initiative is still appreciated as long as it is aligned with the explicit objectives of its leaders. Because it is a synthetic race, it can be produced in a controlled environment, and its population can be increased or decreased depending on the whims of the leaders. It is... Anne, didn't you just say it was from a galaxy that's 2.6 million light years away? I mean, assuming they were able to travel at the speed of light, it would take them 2.6 million years to come to our planet. And you said earlier that they didn't even know about Earth yet, right? Dr. Anderson, the Cordium come from a planet that is 15,000 light years away, and yet they can come and go between their planet and our planet in the time it takes us to travel to the moon, a mere 250,000 miles away. Time is not linear, nor is space. Space is curved, as your physicists have recently learned. As your physicists, that's interesting that he threw that in there, have recently learned, but it can be artificially curved through displacement energy fields that collapse space and the illusion of distance. Light particles do not displace or collapse space. They ride a linear line through space, but there are forms of electromagnetic energy that can modify or collapse space, and this technology makes space travel, even between galaxies, not only possible, but also relatively easy. Anne, why did you say your physicist just then? Oh, she noticed it too. Dr. Anderson, I apologize. It's just a part of the conditioning of being isolated from mainstream society. When you operate for 30 years in a secret organization like the Labyrinth Group, you tend to look at your fellow humans as not your fellow humans, but as something else. The principles of science that the Labyrinth Group has embraced are very different from those taught within there I go again, within our universities. I must be getting tired. Anne, I didn't mean to criticize you. It's just the way you said it. It sounded as though an alien or an outsider said it. Dr. Anderson, I qualify as an outsider, but certainly not an alien. Okay, back to the prophecy or alien race. What do they want? I mean, why travel such a far distance to rule Earth? Dr. Anderson, this seems such a funny question to me. Excuse me for laughing. It's just that humans do not understand how special Earth is. It is truly, as planets are concerned, a special planet. It has such a tremendous biodiversity and a complex range of ecosystems. Its natural resources are unique and plentiful. It's a genetic library that's the equivalent of a galactic zoo. The aliens that are coming desire to own this planet and add it to its colonization plans. As I've already mentioned, this is a synthetic race, a species that can clone itself and fabricate more and more of its population to serve the purpose of its colonization program. However, it desires more diversity, and Earth will represent an opportunity for it to diversify. And so where are they right now? Dr. Anderson, I assume they remain in their home world. To the best of our knowledge, they haven't crossed into our galaxy yet. And when they arrive, how will the ACIO or Labyrinth group know? Dr. Anderson, as I said, the ACIO has already done a significant amount of intelligence gathering and even selected scenarios and intervention points. And so what's the plan? Dr. Anderson, the most logical approach would be to travel to the time and place where the casual thought was born to explore the Milky Way, and through MRP expunge it from the memory of the race. Essentially, convince them that of all the power, essentially, essentially convince them that of all the wonderful life inhabited galaxies, the Milky Way is a poor choice. The Labyrinth group would implant a memory that would lead this race to conclude that our galaxy was not worthy of their serious exploration. And so some other galaxy becomes their next target. Wouldn't we bear the responsibility of their next conquest? Aren't we then perpetrators ourselves? Dr. Anderson, this is a fair question, but I'm afraid I don't know the answer. And why couldn't we, using this MRP technology, simply implant a memory not to be aggressive, to tell this race to stop trying to colonize new worlds that aren't theirs to own like property? Why couldn't we do this? Dr. Anderson, perhaps we will. I don't really know what 15 has in mind. I am, though, confident in his approach and its efficacy. But you said earlier that you feared for your life, that 15 is probably trying to hunt you down even as we speak. Why are you so confident in his sense of morality? Dr. Anderson, in the case of 15, morality doesn't really play a role. He operates in his own code of ethics, and I don't pretend to understand them all, but I'm quite certain of his mission to avert takeover by the alien race, and I'm equally confident that he will choose the best intervention point with the least influence to the overall species of this alien race. It is the only way he can acquire BST, and he knows this. And we're back to God again, aren't we? Dr. Anderson, yes. And so God and 15 have this all figured out? Dr. Anderson, there's no certainty of if that's what you mean. And there's no alliance between 15 and God, at least not that I'm aware of. This is part of the belief system that the Labyrinth group formalized along the path to develop BST. It's logical to us that God is all-powerful and all-knowing because it operates as a universal mind field that interpenetrates all life, all time, all space, all energy, and all existence. This consciousness is impartial, but certainly it's in a position to deny things, or perhaps more accurately, delay their acquisition. And if God exists everywhere, as you say, then why wouldn't he stop this marauding alien race and keep them in their place? Dr. Anderson, again a fair question, but one that I can't answer. I can only tell you that the God I believe in is, as I said before, impartial, meaning that it allows its creation to express themselves as they desire. At the highest level where God operates, all things have a purpose, even aggressive species that desire to dominate other species and planets. It was 15's belief that God orchestrated nothing but understood everything in a universal mind. Remember when I was talking about the galactic mind? And yes, Dr. Anderson, there are planetary minds, solar minds, galactic minds, and a singular universal mind. The universal mind is the mind of God. Each galaxy has a collective consciousness or mind field that is the aggregation of all the species present within that galaxy. The universal mind creates the initial blueprint for each of the galaxies related to its galactic mind or composite consciousness. This initial blueprint creates the predisposition of the genetic codes seated within a galaxy. We, the Labyrinth Group, believed that God designed each galaxy's genetic code with a different set of predispositions or behaviors. And why would this be so? Dr. Anderson. So diversity is amplified across the universe, which in turn permits God to experience the broadest continuum of life. And why is this so important? Dr. Anderson. Because God loves to experiment and devise new ways of experiencing life in all of its dimensions. This may very well be the purpose of the universe. And you're talking like a preacher. You speak like these are certainties or truths that are just self-evident. But they're just beliefs, aren't they? Dr. Anderson. Yes, they're beliefs, but beliefs are important, don't you think? Anne. I'm not sure. I mean, my beliefs are changing every day. They're not stable or anchored in some deep truth that's constant like bedrock or something. Dr. Anderson. Well, that's good. I mean that they change. The Labyrinth Group evolved a very specific set of beliefs. Some of these were based on our experiences as a result of the Cordium intelligence enhancement technologies. Some were based from ancient texts that were studied, and some were borrowed from our ET contacts. And so now you're going to tell me our friendly neighborhood ETs are religious zealots? Dr. Anderson. No, I don't mean that they were trying to convert us to their beliefs. We simply asked and they related them to us. Upon hearing them, they seemed quite a bit more like science than religion, actually. I think that's the nature of our more evolved species. Of a more evolved species. They finally figure out that science and religion converges into cosmology. That understanding the universe is in which we live also causes us to understand ourselves, which is the purpose of religion and science, or at least should be. Anne. Okay, this is getting a little too philosophical for my tastes. Can we return to a question about the wing makers? If, as you say, there's a galactic federation that governs the Milky Way, how do the wing makers factor into the federation? Dr. Anderson. I'm impressed by the nature of your questions, and I wish I could answer them all, but here again, I don't know the answer. I would assume the Federation and the wing makers operate in unison and have a mutually beneficial relationship, but I'm not Anne. But if you can use your remote viewing technology to eavesdrop on this alien race in its entirely different galaxy, why can't you observe the wing makers and the Federation? Dr. Anderson. Actually, we've tried our remote viewing technology on the wing makers. It was one of the first things we tried, but we got nothing. In fact, it was the first time when our technology was completely ineffective. We assumed that the wing makers had developed some form of security that prevented remote viewing, but we weren't sure. As for the Federation, they're fully aware of our remote viewing capability, and in fact, we can't eavesdrop on the Federation because they're able to detect our presence if we observe them through remote viewing. So in deference to their privacy and trusting their agenda, we never imposed our technology on the Federation, perhaps only once or twice. Anne, you'll have to forgive me, Dr. Anderson, but I find all of this a little hard to believe. We've skimmed the surface of about 100 different subjects through the course of this interview, and I keep coming back to the same basic issue. Why? Why would the universe be set up this way and no one on Earth know about it? Why all the secrecy? Does someone think we humans are so stupid that we couldn't understand it? And who the hell is this somebody? Fair question. Dr. Anderson. Unfortunately, there are so many conspiracies to keep this vital information out of the public domain that what ends up in the hands of the public is diluted to the point of uselessness. I can understand your frustration. I can only tell you that there are people who know about these things, but only 15 knows about the larger reality of what we've touched on tonight. In other words, and this is to your point, Anne, there are some people within the military, government, secret network, NSA, CIA, etc., that know parts of the whole, but they don't understand the whole. They aren't equipped with the knowledge to stand before the media and explain what's happening. They fear that they would be made to appear feeble by the fact that they only know pieces of what's going on. It's like the story of the three blind men who are all touching different parts of an elephant, and each thinks it's something different. 15 withholds his knowledge from the media and the general public because he doesn't want to be seen as a savior of humanity, the next Messiah, and he especially doesn't want to be seen as some fringe lunatic who should be locked up, or worse yet, assassinated because he is so misunderstood. The instant he stepped forward with what he knows, he would lose his privacy and his ability to discover BST, and this he'll never do. Excuse me. Most people who know about this greater reality are fearful of stepping into the public scrutiny because of the fear of being ridiculed. You have to admit that the general public is frightened by what it doesn't understand, and they do kill the messenger. And but why can't we get even partial truths about this picture of reality, about ETs and the Federation? Someone, the media or government or someone else, is keeping this information from us, like the story you were telling me about the Martians. If this is true and Clinton knows about this, why aren't we being told? Dr. Anderson, there's a cynical part of me that would say something like, why do you watch 6 hours of television every day? Why do you feed your minds exclusively with the opinions of others? Why do you trust your politicians? Why do you trust your governments? Why do you support the destruction of your ecosystems and the companies and governments that perpetuate this destruction? You see, because the whole of humanity allows these things to occur, the wool is pulled over your eyes, and it's easy to ration information and direct your attention to mundane affairs like the weather and Hollywood. And that's fine for you to say, someone whose IQ can't be charted, but for those of us with average intelligence, what are we supposed to do differently that would give us access to this information, to this larger reality? Dr. Anderson, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't pretend to have the answers, but somehow humans need to be more demanding of their governments and even the media, because the media is a big part of this manipulation, though they're not aware of how they've become pawns of the information cover-up. I don't know about that. The truth of the matter is that no one entity is to blame. Elitists have always existed since the dawn of man. There have always been those who had more aggression and power and would dominate the weaker of the species. This is the fundamental structure that has bred this condition of information cover-up, and it happens in every sector of society, including religion, government, military, science, academia, and business. No one created this playing field to be level and equal for all. It was designed to enable free will and reality selection based on individual preferences. And for those who have the mental capacity to probe into these secrets, behind the secrets, behind the secrets, they usually find pieces of this larger reality, as you put it. It's not entirely hidden. There are books and individuals and even prophecies that corroborate much of what I've spoken of here tonight, and they are readily available to anyone who wants to understand this larger universe in which we live. So, to answer your question, what are we supposed to do differently? I would read and study. I would invest time learning about this larger universe and turn off the television and disconnect from the media. That's what I would do. And maybe this is a good place to wrap things up, unless you have anything else you'd like to add. And he wants to add 2 more pages. Dr. Anderson, only one thing, and that is that if anyone ever reads this interview, please do so with an empty mind. If you bring a mind full of learning and education and opinion, you will find so much to argue with in what I've said that you'll not hear anything, and I'm not interested in arguing with anyone. I'm not even that interested in convincing anyone of what I've said. My life will go on even if no one believes me. The wing makers have built a time capsule of their culture, and it's magnificent. I wish I could take people to the original site so they could stand before each of the 23 chambers and witness these wall paintings in person. If you were to do this, you would understand that art can be a portal that transports the soul to a different dimension. There is a certain energy that these paintings have that can't be translated in mere photographs. You really need to stand inside these chambers and feel the purposeful nature of this time capsule. I think if I could do that, you would believe everything I've said. And could you take someone like me to the site? Dr. Anderson. No, unfortunately, the security system surrounding this site is so sophisticated, the site, for all intents and purposes, is invisible. All I have are my photographs. Anne, you're saying that if I walked right up to the site, I wouldn't be able to see it? Dr. Anderson. Cloaking technology is not just a science fiction concept. It's been developed for more than 10 years. It's used much more frequently than people realize, and I'm not talking about its diluted version of stealth technology. I'm talking about the ability to superimpose a reality construction over an existing reality that is desired to be hidden. For instance, you could walk right up to the entrance of the ancient Arrow site and see nothing that would look like an entrance or opening. To the observer, it would be a flat wall of rock, and it would have all of the characteristics of rock: texture, hardness, and so forth. But it's actually a reality construction that is superimposed on the mind of the observer. In reality, the entrance is there, but it can't be observed because the mind has been duped into the projected reality construction. And great, so there's no way to enter this site and experience this time capsule. So once again, us little humans are prevented from the experience of proof. You see, the reason why this is so hard to believe is that nothing is ever proven. Dr. Anderson. But isn't proof in the eye of the beholder? In other words, what is proof for you may not convince another, or vice versa. Isn't this the way of all religions and even science? Scientists claim to have proof of this theory or that theory, and then some years later another scientist comes along and disproves the previously held theory, and on this goes. And so what's your point? Dr. Anderson. Proof is not absolute. It's not even objective. And what you're looking for is an experience that is permanent and perfect in its expression of truth. And such an experience, if it indeed exists, is not owned or possessed by any secret network or elitist organization or galactic federation for that matter. You could have this experience of absolute proof tomorrow, and the very next day doubt would begin to creep in, and in the matter of weeks or months, this proof or absolute truth that you aspire to possess, it would be just a memory, and probably not even a powerful memory, because so much doubt would be infused into it. No, I can't give you or anyone absolute proof. I can only tell you what I know to be true for me, and try to share it as accurately as I know how with anyone who's interested. I'm less interested in trying to relate the cosmology of the universe than I am in getting the story of the wing makers and their time capsule into the public attention. The public should know about this story. It's a discovery of unparalleled importance, and it should be shared. Anne, you do realize, don't you, that you've made me the messenger? You've asked me to be the one who takes the public scrutiny and suspicions and has to endure all of the ridicule. Dr. Anderson, I'm not asking you to do anything against your will, Anne. If you never do anything with the materials I've given you, I'd understand. All I'd ask is that you return them to me if you're not going to get them out. If I step forward as the messenger, I would lose my freedom. If you step forward, this story could catapult your career, and you're only doing your job. You're not the messenger, you're the transmitter, the media. But you must do what you think best, and I'll understand your decision, whatever you decide. Anne, okay, let's wrap it up here. I don't want you to get the wrong impression that I'm a total disbeliever, but I'm a journalist, and it's my responsibility to validate and cross-check stories before I publish them. And with you, I can't do this. And what you're telling me, if it's true, is the biggest story ever to be told. But I can't take this to the media, at least not the company I work for, because they would never publish it. No validation, no story. Dr. Anderson: yes, I understand, but I've shown you some of the ACIO technologies and photos of the site and its contents, so these must be some form of validation. Anne: for me it is, but it doesn't validate all of the many claims you've made tonight. For all I know, the holographic fractal object technology you showed me is not as unusual or extraordinary, is not so unusual or extraordinary. I'm not a good judge of these things, and even if it were, it certainly doesn't validate the existence of a galactic federation or the wing makers for that matter. Dr. Anderson: well, perhaps you're right. We should end this interview. I promised you several interviews before I left. Are we still on for tomorrow night? Anne: yes. Dr. Anderson: thanks for your interest in my story, Anne. I know it sounds fanciful and outlandish, but at least you've shown restraint in writing me off as a lunatic, and for that you have my thanks. Good night, Anne. Anne: good night. And that is the end of it. So, at the beginning of this story, or interview, or whatever it is, it says, I'm going to reread this just in case you weren't here or you forgot. It says, in this section you will find one of the 5 interviews conducted between Anne and Dr. Anderson, which are pseudonyms, in December 1997, when Anne was first contacted with the discovery of the Wingmaker's about the discovery of the Wingmaker's time capsule. These are the exact transcripts from her tape-recorded interviews and are probably the best way to understand the nature of the discovery and its implications. And before that is the beginning of the chapter says, and this is the part that I think is significant. It says the following story was taken from the internet. A web search for the Wingmakers will turn up the relevant pages that this story is based on. The editor cannot verify whether the following is true or not. What follows is the unedited transcript from the Wingmakers posted in December of 1998. And that's where it gives the background on finding the Broken Arrow site and talks about what the ACIO is and all that. So there you have it. I don't know whether it's real or not. It was an interesting read, though. But that will leave us at Chapter 8 next time, Practical Time Travel. So we'll jump into that on Thursday. So it's late enough. There is no way I'm going to be able to play tonight. So let's see who's around. Old World Charm is playing Baldur's Gate. I've been watching plenty of that lately. Dice Legends, Mr. Blitzer, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Nothing's really jumping out at me as something I want to go to. They just okay. You know what? Let's go over to Old World Charms. He's been... I didn't catch a ton of that, but what I've been here for sounded fascinating, wild, and yet intriguing. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Yeah, it was a long, strange chapter. I'm definitely going to do a little bit of internet search and see if I can come up with this Wingmakers website that it was talking about. Because, yeah, that was interesting, and I'd love to learn more about it. So, all right. I'm gonna go ahead and take us on over to Old World Charm, and thank you for hanging out, listening to me drone on for 40 pages. Um, Hopefully, I didn't bore you too much with my monotone, but let's head on over there. I will see you in a couple minutes.
My heart is beating, I know the pieces. Which one is broken and one is weak? Because I have seen it fall apart. I have no rules about the play. I didn't have anything to say. Follow your heart, but don't overtake it. If you leave it behind, someone will break it. I left you my heart. What did you do? You used it and abused it. You left me all shy.
What's up, Nicolette? That's a super awesome raid. Thank you so much. Oh man, how was your stream? You're about to see some crazy exposition